Oh, welcome to question 62 of the secunda. Secundae, the topic this time is restitution, and I am Dr. Thibault. Restitution is a topic which is, in some ways, one of the more obvious ones, although there's uh, 7 or 8 different articles. Some of it is the most self-explanatory, and anybody who has a background in the American legal system, the common law system, you'll probably see most of this as somewhat obvious according to standards of law. I imagine in civil law countries, they're also probably very similar in terms of justice. Uh, Restitution is justice which directs commutation. And if you recall from question 61, commutation versus distributive justice was introduced, and commutation was the justice owed between two individuals. Between individuals rather than distributed justice, which is between the whole to the parts. The whole to the parts is often uh, government or society to the individual or a family to the individual. Commutative justice is between individuals, so it could be between a business and a person, or just between two people. So if there has been an injustice, primarily in the form of theft uh, or robbery between two individuals, the proper response is the virtue of restitution. And restitution is one of these uh, elements of justice itself. So when we're looking at justice itself, restitution is a part of it. Um, Question that comes up within the Summa, question 62, is restitution necessary for salvation? And for this, in short, the answer would be yes. So, uh, quoting from quoting St. Augustine, St. Thomas says, "Unless a man restore what he has purloined, his sin is not forgiven." So one must return what was taken. If one has unlawfully taken something from another, it must be returned. Otherwise, one cannot be forgiven. You can't steal your friend's property and then ask for forgiveness without returning the property. Part of the forgiveness requires the return of the property. Um, and he goes on to say within Article 2 that there's no shortcut around it, because returning the property, returning the thing which was stolen through commutation, um, you must safeguard justice as a necessary means of salvation. So you can't have uh, injustice uh, as still a means for salvation. So if somebody forgives, but there's been no return of that which has been taken, uh, then there has been, in some sense, an injustice. We can think of uh, examples within the scripture to the contrary of this, of the uh, landowner who forgives a great debt uh, owned by one of the stewards, and then the steward goes on to pursue another fellow worker and doesn't show mercy. And very strong element of strong lesson of this within the gospel is often mercy. This is a bit of a touchy subject, because you have both, in some sense, restitution, which is the human need to make justice, while we also have kind of a supernatural form of justice whereby Christ's death on the cross uh, satisfies justice. Um, there's a little bit of a tension here, which we'll get into in later questions. But uh, I think what St. Thomas is pointing out is very fair, where at least on an earthly level, if we want to be just people, if we want to pursue justice, and justice is a cardinal virtue, so we should. we must return that which was stolen. We can't just go around taking things that belong to others and then saying, well, forgive me, and then we get to keep everything we've taken. There has to be some element of of actual earthly justice if it's within our control to do so. And some people in the oppositions, they point out that what if you cannot repay what was taken? And for example, if one were to gossip and to take one's dignity through gossip, you can't undo gossip. But St. Thomas points out that it's sufficient for salvation's sake to pay back whatever one can. If there's something you can do to repay back, then you ought to do that. Um, it's not enough to say, well, I can't take it back because God, once gossip is out there, it's out there. Therefore, I don't have to do anything. Well, that's not sufficient, according to St. Thomas. One of the questions is in Article 3, how much should be repaid in order for there to be proper restitution? And I think it goes back to the definition of what restitution is about. Restitution is to reestablish equality. That's the primary purpose of restitution. Something has been wrongfully taken, and what has been wrongfully taken must be returned. It's not that the person who lost something is looking for more than what was taken. It's just there should be inequality of return. From taken to return should be equal. In St. Thomas says, in order for the necessity of salvation, anyway, there's no obligation to restore more than the exact amount that was taken. Um, he does then point out that because when something is taken without permission, there's been a theft or a robbery or just a theft of one's dignity or reputation. That in addition to just the material or the physical, there's also an element of sin involved as well. So, and he gives the example of a judge. So, if a person has stolen something, that thing should be returned. That is necessary under restitution. That whatever was taken should be returned. If it can't be returned, then something of equal value, primarily money, should be returned to the person who has lost something, someone who has had a mutation. However, once a person is found as a thief, they go before a judge, and the judge might also require the person to pay for the sin of stealing or the crime of stealing, and then there might be an additional penalty put on that. So if a person robs a house and they're captured, they have to return what they have stolen, which is restitution, but it doesn't mean that they're free to go. um, for the sake of the person who is a thief, sometimes additional penalties must be put on them for some type of penitential element or some type of uh, reform of some kind, some type of penalty to learn a lesson. Um, but that isn't under restitution. Restitution is just to make the person equal. Other things might be also prudent in terms of reforming the person who was stolen, but in terms of the commutation, the taking of the property, for there to be restitution, there just has to be equality. He then points out in the opposition number 2, this idea that Zacchaeus, remember Zacchaeus climbing the tree, he tells Christ that he will pay back 4 times anything he had taken from taken wrongfully and give half of his wealth to the poor. So some of those who are opposed to this idea of equality would say, see, Zacchaeus gave more, therefore more is required, not just equality, But what St. Thomas points out in this is that Zacchaeus was a righteous person and he gave more, which is wonderful. That's good. You know, he couldn't give necessarily everything back to everyone because maybe people died. He might not keep an exact list of everyone he's wronged. So he's giving half of his wealth also to the poor, and he's giving fourfold back. It shows that he's a true sign of a repentant sinner, which is wonderful, but it's not required under restitution. It might be a beautiful sign of salvation, but it's not required under justice to give back fourfold and half of your wealth to the poor. How much must be repaid under restitution? As you can see, some of these questions get a bit repetitive, but he defines a loss using Aristotle. Loss is so called from man having less than what is due, exactly from Aristotle and Nicomachean Ethics, or Nicomachean Ethics, how you pronounce it. Again, he points out that for the sake of salvation, you must pay back what is actually lost. And what pointed out in this question in Article 4 is how about potential losses? You know, there's a certain amount that might be due based on the actual losses, but how about potential or future, or you know, if you stop a person early on, maybe they could have become the next millionaire, but you stopped them. So do you owe the person to become a millionaire, or do you just owe them what you actually took? And the example he gave was, what if you go into a field after a farmer has planted seed and start digging it up? Do you owe back the farmer his seed and his time, you know, and, what he had actually put into planting that seed, or do you owe that farmer the full value of the harvest? The future profits, the potential profits. And what St. Thomas says is, for the necessity of salvation, only the actual loss is required for restitution. So, you know, if the farmer dedicated a certain amount of time to planting the crop and bought seed, which he then planted, you need to return all. You have to make good on those things. But you really don't know. There could have been a locust famine. There could have been a drought. The farmer didn't have to go out and pick the crop. There's the farmer doesn't get isn't owed work which he hadn't even yet done. He doesn't owe he isn't owed payment on that. In terms of restitution, and this is an important point, that St. Thomas says that restitution doesn't require anything more than the covering of actual cost. Um, but the compensation for the potential losses should be covered. Not strictly under justice and not strictly under restitution. It's not fully a commutation, what you were taken by digging up the field. Um, but it ought to be given for potential losses. You know, if you want to use the Zacchaeus model, Zacchaeus would have paid it back because of the goodness he had received through his salvation. He would want to get more back. So I think if the mindset is that you're only seeking to do the minimum, you're probably on the wrong path. But in terms of strictly defining restitution and, of the commutation, it is only the actual cost which must be covered. Uh, Another question, this is a bit of a combination answer, but how do you restore equality? This idea of restitution is about restoring equality. How do you restore equality? And it says, you render all their dues. Render to all their dues is the line from Romans that St. Thomas uses. So you must pay back the person. person who had been wronged. The person who has a loss, you must pay them back, specifically them. Um, there is a question of what if the person that you're dealing with a deposit of a sword, and the person who wants to collect the sword that they had deposited is a madman and would be a danger to the common good. Do you give back the sword? They would say, no, not yet. You will return the sword to the person who it is due to, but not yet. Um, you'll wait until they're in a proper state of mind, but you won't give it back to a madman. Um, we cover this later on with equity. In future questions under the topic of justice. So I won't go into any more detail with that, but yes, you do still owe him his sword back, but you don't owe it to him in the moment that he is mad. Other questions are brought up. What if the person has their honor has been destroyed by your gossip or by your telling false stories behind someone's back? How can you possibly restore a person's honor? Um, and he said, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't restore somebody's honor, but you should uh, take you should make your best effort to do so in a way which you can. If you gossiped in front of your close group of friends, you could go back to them and say, I said this thing the other day. It wasn't true. Or, I said it out of context. I shouldn't have said it. You can go back to those people. If you can't find, maybe it was a group of strangers and you'll never know who they were and you can't go back. There's other ways in which you can find time to a different group of people. Um, say something good about them. If you have spread negative in the world, you must find ways to counterbalance it by spreading some positive in terms of the person. Um, you know, Everybody has both good and bad qualities. So if you can find some positive quality about the person to express, you can look for the good in people and try to spread that more than the negative. So, even if you can't do it exactly, it's not an exact one for one. You can find a way of doing something else in order to raise that person's honor again. Because the real issue with the gossip would be that the person has been dishonored. And so, find a different way to honor them would be the best effort. Um, can't say I don't have to do anything because I can't do it perfectly. You still can try to do something. Um, if the person would be injured, I already said that. If would be injured by it, then don't give it to them. Wait, if a person is drunk and they want their car keys back, um, you probably should not. You should give them their car keys back. It's their car, but you don't have to give it back to them in the moment when they're drunk. You can give it back to them once they become sober again. So timing is necessary in terms of returning it, and this isn't always commutation in an evil sense. Sometimes commutation can be in the form of a loan or a, a bailment or a deposit. As if you don't know what those are, look to question 62, which was already covered. But there's ways to do it lawfully as well. But uh, if the person had died, maybe that you have taken from, just presuming that you're not the cause of death of this person, that maybe you just stolen from them or you've dishonored them in somehow. Um, well, what can you do then? The person has died. There's nothing you can do. Well, St. Thomas says you can still do something. You can give alms for their spiritual welfare. You could pay to have a mass said for them. You could give money to the food pantry in their name. You can do something to honor them in a spiritual way, in a corporal work of mercy type of way. Um, And then if you've taken something of value from them, you could try to return it to their heirs. That would be a good thing. And St. Thomas said you should try to do it as quickly as possible. Get it to them. If you have something that's not yours, you've taken it, you should return it. If the person isn't alive, get it to somebody else who is an heir to that person. Um, uh, And he points it out in Article 8 that you should really do it as quickly as you can, except for the example of the madman or the drunk. But you should get it back to them as soon as you can. And St. Thomas quotes the scripture that says, if you're withholding the wages of a laborer, you are stealing from the laborer, you are murdering the laborer by withholding the laborer's wages. This is a similar thing when you are not paying back somebody something which is owed to them. If you are purposefully delaying this, you are essentially stealing from them again. So you have a duty to return it as quickly as you can. That also prevents further injury and further culpability on your part for having taken it in the first place. It does bring up this interesting topic of what if restoration were to self-incriminate, would be a form of self-incrimination. And if a person were in the confessional, the priest would have a difficult time being able to say, well, you must return this stolen item to the store where you have taken it from, because if the priest were to require something which would then divulge the sin, it would break the seal of the confessional by forcing the person who had come to you for forgiveness to only the way they could receive that forgiveness would be to publicly divulge their culpability, their sin to others. That is a violation of the seal of the confessional. So what do you do when you have this idea that there must be restoration? Um, um, the second part, you are due. Your salvation is dependent upon you having restored what was taken through commutation. You must return it if you can. You must make an effort to return it. At the same time, the priest cannot force a person to reveal their sin to others as part of their forgiveness. So, what do you do in that situation? Well, St. Thomas points out that the sinner could give the stolen product, the product of commutation, to the priest, and then the priest could then return it to the rightful owner. I'm not sure priests today would be a fan of having to drive around town returning stolen goods. And people start to think, boy, that church really is full of a lot of thieves. The priest is awfully busy. Although I probably, if you would ask most priests if they could do something simply in order to do more good in the world, they probably would do it without a problem. But that was St. Thomas's recommendation. Give it to a priest, or you could probably even say any third party. You could give it to somebody else to return it to the rightful owner without the person who was culpable on divulging their sin. So as you can see, what St. Thomas is pointing out here is that it's very important that the person who has been wronged get whatever has been taken through commutation returned. That there must be justice. There must be equality here. It's not an emotional, sentimental thing. There's just something that is owed to them, which should be returned. However, it is that they can return it. If they get it in the U.S. Postal Service, that's all that matters. You don't need to necessarily have a sit down heart to heart talk about it, but it just has to be returned to them in the form of um, restitution. There has to be restitution for it. He brings up uh, approaching the end. Are there accomplices in commutation? So, is anybody else responsible for a person's commutation, theft, or robbery? He talks about there are uh, people who are directly responsible for being an accomplice in commutation. Um, and he said those are those who counsel or give consent to the person who directly did the taking. So if you encourage somebody to take something, steal something, somebody says, "Oh, I'm going to steal this sweatshirt," or, you go, "Don't There's somebody coming. Wait a few minutes. Okay, now you can go take it." Well, if you're encouraging the person to take it, you are an accomplice. You are you are also culpable for that sin, and therefore you are also responsible for restitution of the thing that was taken. You equally are responsible for that restitution. Um, Also offering assistance. That example is a little bit of both. If you're coaching the person how to steal, you are offering assistance. You are also responsible for restitution. And if you're taking part in the robbery and theft, then you're probably very obviously part of it and require restitution. If you are the getaway driver, well, just because you didn't hold the gun and say, "Give me all your money," doesn't mean that you're not part of that robbery. So, in that case, are directly involved in the commutation and therefore owe a restoration. Um, One can also indirectly be part of this, and this kind of it's a little bit on the similar in wording to the first one. Not counseling or commanding in such a way whereby it would have prevented an injustice. So again, there's kind of counseling. So, but this is indirectly. So this would be uh, not saying, not egging the person on. Maybe the person is just in passing telling you that they're going to steal from a store, and you didn't counsel them on how to do it or how to do it better, but you didn't say, "Don't do that." So this is where you should have said something, uh, and you didn't. Yeah, you didn't counsel them against commutation or commanding them to not do it. Um, and it's an interesting little caveat in here, though, is it would have to um, be foreseeable that your counseling or command would actually prevent the injustice. Um, if it would not prevent the injustice, then it has no effect. That would be kind of a gray area, but the person doesn't listen to you. Maybe if you think of if you were to think of a high school or something like that, and there's a unpopular kid at the lunch table. Um, Everybody makes fun of the person, and the other people at the table say, "We're going to put a cherry bomb in the toilet and blow up the plumbing of the school." And the kind of nerdy kid at the table goes, "Don't do it." Um, well, that's very endearing that he said that. But um, if nobody ever listens to him anyway, then I'm not sure that he is culpable, even indirectly, for that, because he didn't has no say and no his counseling is not listened to. Whereas if that person who said it, their best friend, were to say to them, "Don't do it," well, then that person might listen to their best friend. So it depends on who you are to that person and if your words will have any influence. Uh, Now, this is an interesting one because of it has a much larger social context to it. So, quoted within question Article 7 uh, of question 62 of this secundae, this line, by command, by counsel, by consent, by flattery, by receiving, by participating, by silence, by not preventing, by not denouncing. These are all used within, if you were to Google this line, you can find it dozens and dozens of times. And it is a standard which we use to define complicity, within law. One is complicit in this injustice if one has participated in any of these ways in this line. So this line is really quite a famous line now, and has much wider effects. Probably there's people who are in the American law system which use this on a frequent basis, and they have no idea that its origins are in the Summa Theologica. But right after St. Thomas gives this line, he also then says there's 5 ways which bound a person to offer restitution. And it's not all of the above that he just listed, ironically. He says command, which is above, and then consent. If you command that the wrong be done, the commutation be done, then you're responsible for it, even if somebody else is the one who physically does it. If you commanded it, you owe restitution. By consent, if you go along with it, you also owe somebody restitution. If you've received the goods that were stolen, taken, then you owe restitution for them as well. If you know that your friend has stolen stuff from the store, but he's going to offer normally a video game for $100, and they're going to sell it to you for $20, and you know that it was stolen. Well, you say, well, I didn't steal it. I bought it for $20. If you know your friend stole it, you owe restitution to the store for possessing stolen goods. Participation, quite obviously, if you're participating in the commutation, then you owe restitution for it, and not preventing that theft which one has the authority to stop. And this is a little bit like the indirect situation in the last slide. So if you have the authority or your voice to counsel in such a way that would stop the person from doing it, and you did not counsel the person to not do it, then you are indirectly responsible, and he would say you are responsible for restitution to the people who are the victims. The victim couldn't have stopped this, but you could have stopped it, and you didn't. So therefore, you owe restitution. And really, in some ways, it's what it's saying is if you anyway cause this commutation, if you cause the sin, you're complicit. And if you're complicit, you will owe some type of restitution. So in conclusion, on the topic of restitution, restitution is something which is necessary for salvation. It's a type of satisfaction. It restores, restitution aims to restore equality, aims to give return to a person what has been lost, whether it's something physical or their dignity or their reputation. If you can't go directly to the person because the person has died, you can try to do it in a spiritual way or through their heirs. You should try to do it as quickly as possible. That's important in order not to prolong the injustice. And it should be restored to the person who has been taken by the people who have created the loss. And if one can't do it without their sin being revealed, you could always use a third party, even a priest, to return it. And that's it for looking at justice in itself. And we'll look forward to doing question 63 next. Have a great week.